Subscribe to Selby is Godcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Unbelievable.
You know me, I'm always looking for the bright side of every topic. So the bright side here, when it's time to get rid of the shipping containers, you just ship them out. They're already ready to go. You just back up the truck. You can do whatever you want with them. They're already ready to ship.
Brian Barron, the Guardian's president of business, was like offering the shipping containers to reporters last week. Hoynesy, you want to take one home with you today?
Wait. Take the shipping container home. Where would you put that in your house? What would you do with that?
Just back up your Jeep into the loading dock and we'll stick it on there. You can take it home, and we don't care what you do with it. Just get it the hell out of our stadium.
Oh, that sounds like a great idea. It's like taking one of the seats right out of the old stadium. You want to hold on to that forever. And there are people that probably still have that somewhere in their basement. They grab two of them. They watch movies and games in them. I don't know. It probably can't be that comfortable, but it's part of your history. You grew up with it. Does anyone really look fondly on those shipping containers? Maybe if you were standing on one during a 2016 playoff game and you had the time of your life, maybe. But what would you do with that thing? You stick it in the backyard? It always sounds like a great idea until you realize how big that is. What would you do with that?
The year, was that 2016 in the spring when they unveiled those? Did you go up there, like on a tour?
Mm-hmm. I did.
Do you remember what you were thinking? Because I did too, and I remember, First of all, it's really high up, but
yeah,
I remember thinking, like, this isn't what I was anticipating. Like, this is not going to go over well.
Yeah, well, I mean, in fairness, the left field porch, when there's nobody there in January, doesn't look that fun either. It's just concrete. But your view of the game's a hell of a lot better than you were from right field. You're up with the birds. The birds, it's not like they land next to you. They are flying at your eye level, and they think they're high. It was not a good view. But I think it was right when they had unveiled a lot of that to us in the middle of the winter, and I remember being up there. You're really high, and so the wind is just whipping through there, and it was that biting wind. You can feel it. It almost is that kind of wind that takes you 3 days to get it out of your system, 3 hot showers to get it out. And so I'm picturing, could you imagine being up here in April or even late October? Ooh, I don't want to imagine that. We'll see if it's any better when it's actually a bar, an actual bar that is supposed to be out there.
Well, if you haven't checked out the shipping containers in the 7 years of their existence, this is your last chance. So make sure you go climb Mount Everest to get up there and take a picture and look at all the players on the field who look like ants. And imagine what it'll be like in 2024.
No better and no worse than being up in the upper deck of the Rocket Mortgage Fieldhouse. They look legitimately like ants down on the court as they're shooting their three-pointers. Is that a three-pointer or is it a layup? I can't tell. My vision is obscured up here.
It is amazing the difference in like appreciation for what you're watching when you're sitting in the upper deck compared to, like, I used to have season tickets for the Cavs long time ago when it was called, is it still called Loudville? I don't think it's called Loudville anymore. Our seats were terrible. I was like just out of college, and they were bad teams, so they were really cheap. Buddy and I decided we'd buy them and just go to every game and sit through some really miserable times watching Samardo Samuels and Jeremy Pargo and Manny Harris, Luke Herringody. But
sounds like the good old days to me.
I remember, I think just like as appreciation for sitting through so many of those games, they gave us courtside seats one night, and I remember thinking, like, this is a different sport. When you're sitting in the upper deck, I can't tell if your 3-point attempt had arc to it, or if it's just a line drive, or if it's I don't know if it's headed toward the basket or anything. And then when you're sitting courtside, you can see the sweat bouncing off the player's arms. Like it's just totally different. I think in baseball it's the same too. When you're sitting in the upper deck, especially on an angle, you have no idea if this is a home run or if it's a 2-hopper to shortstop. And then when you're sitting close and you can really appreciate, oh my God, did you see the movement on that slider? It's just night and day. It's unbelievable, the difference.
It's weird when a home run never gets above your eye line.
Yeah.
You're thinking, how did that get over the fence? It never got higher than me. How did that work? Yeah, it's weird. I would compare it, as far as the basketball goes, it reminds me of playing, I don't know, being Bobby Sura driving to the basket with NBA Live 97 compared to probably what's happening now on the 27th generation of consoles. That's the difference between being up in the upper deck and sitting courtside. You're right, completely different game. The speed at which those players are playing compared to when you're way up high, mind-blowing. So we'll see. What were your? We're running through some of this and having fun with it, but what were some of your reactions to seeing what they're planning to do with Progressive Field? Some of it we kind of already knew, but now with the video, you at least get a chance to maybe make it a little bit more real as compared to some pictures that somebody threw together, and you weren't even sure whether this was part of the plans or just a conceptual thought. You didn't know at that time.
Yeah, so most of this has been out there for about a year and a half. I think I reported it in the summer of 2021. But what that allows us to do is see changes that were made during this process, during the planning. And, they had thoughts in their mind in 2021 when they came to the agreement on the lease extension, but then you actually hire the architects who are going to execute the plan, and the plan can change a little bit. So I think with some of the main things, obviously they've wanted to get rid of the shipping containers pretty much since the moment that they unveiled them. It's funny that even team employees are now calling them shipping containers. I think there was some resistance to that for a long time internally, that now they're just who cares? We got to get these things the hell out of here. So, the upper deck was always a big part of this, because if you didn't have an upper deck ticket, what motivation would you ever have to go up there? There aren't many sight lines where you can see the city, so there's no benefit to just going higher in terms of altitude. There is, if you are on the concourse looking out toward the river, I think there's a cool view, looking out over the bridge. But from where you're standing for that view, it's not like you have a view of the field. They want to change that. You want to give people incentive to go upstairs, to explore more areas. So just more bars, more local eateries, more just modernizing the upper deck, because it hasn't been touched since the ballpark opened 29 years ago. I think that's always been a big thing. I think that's great. Trying to connect the two levels more, just so that's more seamless and doesn't seem like a task. All right, let's go do a lap upstairs and then we'll come back down. And the Terrace Club has always been a big part of this too. I think there were questions on exactly what they wanted to do with it. I like the look, what they settled on with that kind of staggered seating, and you're still on an angle facing home plate. It looks like a cool place that you'd want to sit. But it's interesting just how fans' needs and desires have changed in 30 years. Because when the ballpark opened, the Terrace Club was the hot spot. It was white tablecloth. You wanted to sit down and have a really good meal and then be fancy and watch your game from indoors. But they don't use that ever anymore. So it's not, things have changed. And then I think just the main thing is, I've seen a lot of people sort of mock it with oh, I went to the bar and a baseball game broke out. Like, that's what the sentiment's going to be, because so much of what they're doing is centered around beer gardens and social spaces and whatnot. But that's just where we are as a society. We have short attention spans. You know, how many people really want to sit in their seats, watch a 3.5-hour baseball game, and not move from their seats? I think the percentage of people who that's their goal for attending a game has gotten smaller and smaller. So that's not to say that those people can't do that. You can. It's just you're trying to give more people more options than what they might want. And, you know, you've seen the success of the corner when those ballpark gates open every Friday and Saturday night or every playoff game. There is like the running of the bulls over to the right field corner to get your spot at the drink bros. So if you can replicate that and create more hot spots around the ballpark, maybe you can drive more attendance.
Yeah, I have seen that too, where people are complaining, making fun of what this has become. And at one point, I probably would have thought that way. It's almost similar to what do they need extended netting down there? Just everyone pay attention. And you think, as someone like me who grew up loving and is into, when I'm at a game, I'm paying attention to every single pitch. I want everyone else to feel that way, but that's not how everyone consumes the game. I can't expect everyone to consume the game the same way I do. And if I want the sport that I love to stay relevant, it has to adapt to the modern audience. We can complain about certain things, or you could just adapt. And I think here is maybe a thought that I've had previously with the organization. They get mad at the way that fans react to other sports in the city and say, well, why do the Browns get all this attention? They don't deserve it. And they're not saying this publicly, but probably to themselves, they're thinking these sorts of things. Okay, you can get mad at the behavior and you can scream about it. But what does that do to fix your problem, other than maybe making you feel better by venting your frustrations? You need to adapt. And so as I put it on Twitter to somebody, you can complain about the way that the water is flowing, or you could just build your boat to better handle that flow. And I think that's what and certainly in this situation in Cleveland, is attempting to do. You can get mad at what has become of the sport, where it's not just 40,000 people sitting down in their seats and watching every single pitch. Well, if you do that and you're still trying to operate like it's 1995, your team is going to be completely irrelevant. You need to adapt. You can complain about it and be mad about it, but do you want your sport to thrive? Do you want this team to be to have a progressive field that's a happening place that people want to be at? Then you have to adapt. And whether or not this is a success, you can't say that. I can't say that. A lot of this comes down to, you can make the space great, but are you going to fill it with people working there? Is it going to be a place that has something exclusive that you can't get in other areas of the ballpark? Or is it just going to be the same shit that you had downstairs, upstairs? Then why am I doing that? Or if there's nobody working up there, why am I going up there? So you got to put energy into this stuff too. You mentioned the Terrace Club. At one point, people wanted to go there. Why do you not want to go there now? Because it's nothing special. They don't treat it as something special. And maybe this is the chicken and the egg conversation. Do people not go there because it's not special, or did it become not special because people don't go there? I don't know, but I can tell you right now, there's no reason to go to the Terrace Club unless you're trying to escape the masses going to the bathroom and you know that there's a hidden one in there. Wait, I probably shouldn't have given that away on the show. Either way, I'm okay with it. I think there's an interesting concept here, but that's not it. That's not the end. And once it's built in a couple of years, it doesn't mean you just let it become its own thing. You have to put energy into this stuff to make people want to go there. It can't just be a cool area. It has to be a cool area with exclusive stuff that is manned by people working there. You have to put energy into it, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think there were questions about the sports book too, which certainly that's another thing where I think there was probably a lot of resistance, maybe from older generations, on why do we need these things in our ballparks and stadiums. We saw the Cavs unveil their Caesars Sportsbook. Look, I think it's something that can attract people to a venue. I think it's something that just seems cool that you'd want to check out. That it's not for everybody, but it is for a growing number of people. But Major League Baseball, being Major League Baseball, has prohibited a physical betting counter or kiosk inside their ballparks. So they have the partnership with Bet365. They're looking into a partnership with someone where they can have a physical sports book, but it can't be inside the gates. So I know there's been talk about a few different things. I think maybe you look for that New Era store that's like just outside the gates, I think technically, but you can access it inside the gates. That could be a spot. But that's another element to this. Because I said the same thing. Someone told me a few weeks ago, no sports book. And I said, why? And I think they weren't quite at liberty to say all of that yet. But it didn't really make sense to me. Now it does. But again, it's just baseball kind of getting in its own way. And maybe there's more red tape that we don't know about. But, you know, you're just trying to adapt things. And it's also not just the current, like what are people's preferences now. You have to think moving forward, because it's not like you get $435 million to spend every other year. You know, this doesn't come around all the time. So you need something that's going to last and remain attractive to a wide number of people 5-10 years from now.
Some of that is impossible to know. You take risks. Certainly, they're calculated. You don't just come up with something completely crazy, but you do have to be thinking ahead a little bit. It's an uphill battle to just be mad about this. It's much better to just do things that you think are going to make this a fun place to be, that your fans want to be. There should be some thought here that when somebody is getting ready to leave work, that they just want to hop over to the ballpark. They just want to hang out with friends. It's the previous way baseball was consumed. You couldn't just go to the ballpark to hang out and have a conversation and chat, or even if they're playing an afternoon game, have a lunch meeting at the ballpark. And you could say, well, what does it matter? What does it matter? Those people aren't watching the game. They're people that are inside the gates that are now in the atmosphere of the ballpark. I just think it's important to have as many reasons for people to not leave downtown when they are downtown, or that they aren't downtown, that they want to go there because it's a fun place to be. As far as the sports book goes, I'm with you. I'm like, why? That seems like a missed opportunity. But the more I thought about it, and your thought toward what does the future hold, is that important to have a physical sports book? With the way sports betting is now, my sports book it's right here. This is it right here on my phone. Do I need a physical place to go outside of just having a place where there's a lot of TVs with a lot of games on? Again, right here. I got that. It's right here. I can watch whatever I want pretty much at any time. Maybe that's cool now. In 5 years, is it important to have a physical place, a sports book that you're going to go sit at? Maybe I'm being behind the times here and not thinking that's probably not the most important use of a space here.
I think if you make it a cool area, you can get casual fans who might live in Cleveland, pay attention to baseball, or just love sports betting, and they can be on the scene, and you can watch the important innings of the Guardians game, but you can also sit in this cozy lounge with comfortable couches and plenty of beer and 50, 80-inch TVs and keep an eye on the other games that you're betting on too, so that when you hit the first 6 legs of your parlay and then Clase closes it out for the 7th and final leg and you hit your plus 3,000 parlay, like that's your dream night with your buddies. I don't know. I mean, I think there are benefits. You have to make it a place where people would actually want to check out. Because I could say the same thing about Vegas. It's like, what's the point of sitting in a sports book all day when every place has TVs? There's there's 3 TVs showing different games right above the blackjack table, and I can place the bets on my phone. But there's something about being in a spot where you can watch all these things happening at once, other people rooting for the same things or rooting against you, and maybe sort of that camaraderie in there. I don't know. I don't think it can hurt. I mean, again, it sounds weird. I think if we would have explained all this 20, 30 years ago, the idea of creating more spaces inside the ballpark for people not to watch the game seems a little contradictory here. But I don't want to diminish what's happening on the field. But it is, especially baseball, I mean, it is sort of like it's a gathering spot, and the game on the field is what ties everything together. And so you don't have to be engrossed in every pitch. If you want to sit down and keep score, like in the olden days of 15 years ago, go for it. No one's these aren't preventing you from doing that. But just the way things are now, I think I want to say like the Atlanta Hawks have like a barber shop in their arena now. So you can get your hair cut during a Hawks game. like that might be a little ridiculous, but just you're giving people options. I think that's the main point. It's like the whole, like the kids' clubhouse. Yeah. Like you're taking your kids to go down a slide and to play in a ball pit. And it's like, well, you don't really have a good view of the game from there. But it's just
no, you can't confirm.
It's just something. It caters to another audience, and so it makes sense from the team's perspective. And then if you're a family of 4 and you're like, what should we do with these kids to help them burn energy on this Sunday afternoon? That's actually an option where it wouldn't have been if you're just hoping that your 5 and 3-year-old sit in these plastic green seats for 9 innings.
And the habit of going to a ballpark for those younger kids is formed from a younger age. They're not always going to want to go to the kids' clubhouse forever. And I don't want to get all nostalgic and talk about the good old days here, but someday they will ask to go to the playground for the very last time. So enjoy it while you can. That's what I tell myself. But you are creating an atmosphere where you're creating memories for families and young kids that are going to be maybe doing that in the future with their children too, because they remember how much fun they had going to the ballpark. So it's all good. You're right. There are many ways to consume the game. You have to try to bring as many of them in and make them feel welcome as possible. We could all be the baseball gatekeepers here, the way that there's gatekeepers on anything. You know, a band, music. You don't really like that band? Name 10 songs. What the hell does it matter if they love one song? At least they like that one song from that band that you love, and it's supporting that band to help them make more music that hopefully you will love in the future. We're all guilty of that. I'm guilty of that all the time. Gatekeepers on stuff. Why can't we just be more welcoming and accept that there are going to be more people perhaps more interested? Is it a money grab? Sure. Isn't this all a money grab? Isn't life one giant money grab, a chance to try to make as much profit as possible? Doesn't that benefit the team? Doesn't that make the team want to stay within Cleveland if it's popular and people want to go to that ballpark and money is being spent there? I don't know. I don't see why we need to get up in arms about it.
And there's an underlying angle here that no one's talking about, and it doesn't need to be talked about for a while. But think about the alternatives, right? This ballpark, incredibly, is now the 11th oldest in baseball. It opened in 1994. 2 other ballparks built around that time, Turner Field and the old ballpark in Arlington, are gone. The Rangers and the Braves built new ballparks after, I think, 20 and 24 years, something like that. Progressive Field, this will be season number 30, which is insane. At some point, you have to make a decision. You either build a new ballpark or you try to keep up, maintain the current one you have, and innovate and adapt it to the times as much as you can, right? You know, you're not seeing too many. There are obviously the historic landmarks like Wrigley and Fenway, But for the most part, you're seeing teams and cities move on from ballparks after shorter and shorter amounts of time. So the lease goes through 2036, possibly through 2046. If it gets through 2046, you're talking about more than half a century. And so one question is, if they didn't do this, is the city building them a new ballpark right now or in the near future? I don't think they're coughing up the money for that. So you have to do this, and you have to try to keep it as modern as you can. I think another thing that isn't discussed much is more than half of the money of the new lease, I think, is toward just capital repairs, the infrastructure, the stuff you don't see. And that's to try to make this thing last as long as possible. Because I think they feel, and they've said this, in private, but they feel like this is going to have to be a Dodger Stadium, a Fenway Park, a place that's going to last a really long time, because it's just not realistic for them to build a new ballpark. So it'll be interesting to see where this goes, but they have to do things like this to keep the ballpark not looking like a raggedy old ballpark.
And for the most part, haven't they done that? To this point, does it look like it should be 30 years old? Maybe if you're sitting there with a magnifying glass and looking for the flaws in it, yeah. And there are certain things that don't make a lot of sense. How the guts of the ballpark are, and some of this actually goes into the renovations like the clubhouse and whatnot, but there are certain things that are clearly meant for 1994, not where we're at now in 2023. But it is to a point where if you were born around the time that this place was built, if you're a fan of another team and you watch baseball and you see Progressive Field, it's instantly recognizable. There are a lot of ballparks that maybe aren't, but you see Progressive Field and it looks recognizable. It still has a certain charm to it that maybe only gets better with age if they take care of it and they keep making these changes. And you mentioned Fenway and Wrigley. Those ballparks have gone through changes too. Wrigley Field looks completely different. Well, maybe not completely different, but a lot different than it once did even 20 years ago. And that's an iconic ballpark that I'm sure there was a lot of pushback about making these drastic changes to Wrigley Field. Is anyone mad today that those changes were made, or is that ballpark better for it?
Fenway is actually near the top of my list of favorite ballparks because I think they've done an amazing job of preserving the history of it while also modernizing it. And you remember Wrigley Field when we covered the World Series, not having an elevator was just killer.
Oh, it was brutal.
Stupid things like that. I remember I attended a game at Wrigley Field in 2012, sat in the stands. There was a big pillar literally in front of my seat. So I'd have to sit on the edge of my seat and look around it to be able to see what was happening in the infield. But Fenway, I think, has done a really nice job of sort of walking that tightrope between old and new. And, Progressive Field doesn't have to do that yet. It's 30 years old. But just thinking about the future and what you can do to make it not seem like it is one of the older parks in the league is, I think, one of the trickier tasks that they have to think about.
A good reminder for me also is that social media is not real. Twitter is not real. We see backlash to this stuff, and we think everybody's up in arms about this. There's a lot of pushback on it. Is it really? Or is that just from a few people you see on Twitter, and we're just yelling at some straw man that we made up, accept these changes? There might be a large percentage of fans that actually are down with this or are just rolling with the flow. They don't care one way or another. It's just cool, something else to check out when I'm there.
I have a theory, and I'm going to give you partial credit for it.
Wait. Is
you've
going
pointed
this far?
Good. You always said the Browns were geniuses because they made their uniforms so terrible They made their uniforms so terrible for a few years that when they just brought back the regular uniforms that they had worn for a long time, everyone thought they were the greatest thing ever, right? I think planting these shipping containers for 7 or 8 years is going to wind up being genius. Because no matter what they do in the right field upper deck, and I think they're planning like group social spaces in a beer garden, whatever, like you could put anything up there that's not shipping containers and people will love it.
Oh, man. Okay. I can get down with the 4D chess, the galaxy brain of the shipping containers. There's no erasing that decade of my mind, but they were there, and everything you put there is going to look better in comparison. Yeah, you're right. And that Browns, I swear, I will go to my death thinking the reason for those awful uniforms was so that they could just refresh the old ones, repackage it. Look how great this is. Okay. Well, if you've made it this far into the show, 30 minutes, and you don't know who we are, I'm TJ, that's Zach. We do a terrible job of promoting this podcast. But hi, welcome to the Selby's Godcast. This is what we do, Zach. We just get organically into conversations. Other shows tell you in the first 3 minutes, go to YouTube and subscribe, like. If you like this content, it really helps us out. Find us on Apple Podcasts, Google, Stitcher, Spotify, and go to the Patreon if you want to support the show and get one additional episode for $1 an episode at patreon.com/SelbyIsGodcast. You hear a lot of that self-serving promotion on other shows, but we don't do it here. We just do it in joke format where I just package all of it to you and pretend like I wasn't going to do that.
I hope there's someone who's like watching along on YouTube and they're 30 minutes in and they're like, are these guys ever going to say what I'm watching here? I still don't know.
Check the damn description of the episode. We do occasionally talk about things on the field as opposed to around the field, one of which I think is an interesting conversation that was brought up within our Discord, I believe. I know I've seen it on Twitter, and I've been thinking about it for a while. Let's kick off another round of the Amed Rosario Wars. He's got 1 year left on his control. Then he's going to be heading for free agency, if nothing changes before now and then. That means that Cleveland's going to have an opportunity, should they so choose, to extend him a qualifying offer if nothing changes between now and then. Should they do it? I think it's a fascinating conversation because on the surface you might think he's not worth almost $20 million. But you have to think about this through the prism of who else is available, the position that he plays, and just the current landscape of baseball.
So it depends on what your goals as a team are. If you believe, assuming things stay the same, and it seems like Arias or Freeman or Rocchio is ready to assume a starting job, and that Andres Jimenez is still a legit player. That's sort of the context I'm working with here. Then you're extending him a qualifying offer in hopes that he says no. I think he would say no, because if you look at the shortstop market next winter, there is nobody. It is the opposite of what you had this year. So he is the king fish. Is that the prized fish? He's the walleye stuffed with weights by the local Cleveland
Prized
people who were
catch.
cheating in that scandal.
Be the top catch, prized catch?
I don't know.
Why are we getting tripped up on this? Continue your point.
Remember when I wanted them to be named the
Why is it
Cleveland
always
Walleye?
fish? It's always fish with you.
I know
always
nothing
comes
about
back
it.
to it.
Anyway, he's the guy. Like, there's nobody else. So I don't think he's going to land a $200 million deal, but he's going to get something decent from somebody, more so than a 1 year, $19.5 million offer, which will then send him into free agency the next year. And I'm just going to assume that the free agent market will be better than it is now. So that's sort of the thinking. You know, if you aren't confident in Arias and Rocky or Freeman, or you've traded two of those guys, then yeah, maybe you want to offer it to him in hopes that he accepts it. But if that's the case, then you've probably tried to sign him to a long-term extension anyway. So I think there are more scenarios in which you would present him the qualifying offer than you wouldn't. Like, can you think of a case where you wouldn't want to extend it to him? I guess if he just has a terrible year.
Well, yeah, I suppose that, or if he's hurt the entire year or something like that. They don't go into this blind either. Even if they don't anticipate extending him, they don't go in here with no idea of what he might be seeking. They're always having these conversations. You would know whether you have a better idea of what his reaction would be to the qualifying offer, as opposed to us, who've never had a conversation with his agent in regard to this, and certainly not in the manner in which Cleveland would. But I can't, and I wrestled with it for a little bit. A lot of it is coming down to, is he worth almost $20 million? If he's giving you 3 wins, then yeah, probably. If it's below that, it's a little borderline. But do you see a scenario where he would pick it up, given where he's at in his age? So he'd be entering his age 28 season. Mm-hmm. Would he want to delay that another year and then enter the market again? Not when the market is what it is right now, for nobody being at his position. He would want to test the waters. And he can't do that. There's no, let me go. I mean, I guess there's a little bit in baseball, isn't there, still, where they can test the water a little bit before they accept the qualifying offers? Am I remembering that, or am I thinking of
like just throw a little bit of chum in the water and see if you get a bite?
I mean, there's a
Why
few
is it
days
always fish?
I don't know. There's a few days between getting it and accepting it, but either way,
yes,
you get some chance to know what your market would be before you do that. Doesn't mean you make the right call, because certainly some players don't. I just can't see a scenario unless he thinks he's not going to get a contract from Cleveland, and he's Jose Ramirez-ing this situation and saying, I'm not leaving. In whatever scenario entails me not leaving, I'm sticking around right here. I just don't see that.
It's amazing. We've talked about this, but like, the guy, he is so consistent. Every full season he plays, the numbers look identical. And that's so valuable, to just know what you're going to be getting out of someone who plays an important position, whether he should or not. But there is value there. And someone who's so steady is so freaking polarizing. It's unbelievable. Anytime I write about him, I get emails saying, why are you so hard on this guy? Like, they shouldn't trade him. You're an idiot for thinking that. Well, if I'm an idiot, then you're calling the front office an idiot for considering these things too. But then I get people who say they should sign him to a 5-year extension. Like, they'd be stupid to let him go. And it's amazing the ends of the spectrum you get for a guy who's always right in the middle. Like, it's so fascinating to me. Maybe that's why it is that way, is because I think maybe it's very difficult to evaluate the value of someone who is, by all measures, league average. You know, I just wrote about Carlos Santana over the weekend, and you know, he was just such a solid, steady player who was really hard to appreciate in the moment, I think, for a lot of people. And you look back on his numbers year by year and where he ranks in team history, and you say, oh my God, that was one of the best players to ever put on a Cleveland uniform. But maybe he wasn't quite the dominant threat you hoped, and maybe you just aren't someone who loves watching a player draw a bunch of walks. So I don't know. It's just it's weird with Rosario, because I feel like every time we talk about him, whether it's to trade him or not to trade him, to extend him or not to extend him, to give him a qualifying offer or not, I almost feel like I'm discounting his ability and his production, because we're even considering the alternative, and you're trying to rush to who's next in line without knowing what they're capable of. And I think, well, if you knew right now that Gabriel Arias could put up the season that Amed Rosario would put up, you'd be ecstatic about that. But not knowing is part of the equation, and it's more important part of the equation when you're a contending team. And that's a big part of this too. Because there are a lot of scenarios here. I mean, if it's July and the Guardians are just not in the race for whatever reason, he's gone. If he's having another really good season and you're not thrilled with what you're getting from Arias or Rocchio at AAA, I don't know that the two sides would agree to an extension, but I would think that it might be broached. It's not out of the realm of possibility. So there's just a lot of scenarios on the table. And I still think the most likely one is he just plays out his last season of control and they say, hey, thanks, man.
I agree. I think it is wild that if one of the shortstop prospects gave you what Rosario has, you would consider that a massive success. 2.5 to 3 wins out of Arias this season, that's a success. You already have that. Now, granted, you're paying more for Rosario to do it, but the payroll is $85 million-ish. Like, okay, what has that prevented you from doing that you otherwise would have done? I think that's one area we could take this, though. Instead of thinking, would he or would he not accept it, worst case scenario is he does take it. What does that do for the team in 2024? What does that prevent them from doing? Let's say he does take it. There's nearly $20 million now sent to Rosario. What has that prevented you from doing? Are you not able to sign someone to an extension here that you would have been able to otherwise? Is it taking your payroll to another level? This is part of the equation. I don't think the worst case scenario here is Rosario returns on that sort of contract. You're probably going to get close to what that value would be on the free agent market as far as wins per dollar. So I don't even think the worst case scenario here where he accepts the qualifying offer is like a Armageddon type thing. It shouldn't be for this franchise, but I don't think it is.
Those are key words. So this is a topic we should get to soon. I don't think we have time for it today, but people were throwing around in our Discord. I think it was an article on MLB.com just predicting the World Series matchups for the next decade, and there was really not much basis behind any of it, but it had me thinking, what year will the Guardians have the best chance to win a World Series? Is it 2023? Is it 2024? Is it beyond that? Does Bieber factor into this equation? Does Jose Ramirez's age factor into this equation? We can talk about this. I think it can be an entire podcast. But
it was last year.
Bringing it back here, you never know when it is the year, right? 2016 was their best chance, we thought, or we know now. But it makes me think, like, you look at the payroll, it's going to be in that $85 to $90 million range. There are two schools of thought here. Like, that should not be, I will always say this, don't spend money just to spend money, but you should have more flexibility than that. If there is someone else they can get, like Trey Mancini should not have been off limits just because he got, $7 million a year for 2 years. Like, if they thought he was a good fit, they should have gone and gotten him before he signed with the Cubs. Money should not have been an issue there. I don't know if it was or wasn't. Point is, like, if you end up giving Amed Rosario $20 million next season, that shouldn't matter. If your payroll's 95 or 100, I would think that 2024 is probably pretty high on the list of best years to win a World Series. So if you're not even at triple digit, 9 figures for your team payroll, like, if you have to make sacrifices elsewhere because of that's just pathetic. So yeah, I think there's a lot in play here. I wonder if they're still building up. They're so squirrely about answering questions specific to the payroll. We knew that they were going to increase it. We didn't know by how much. You could say a 20% increase in the payroll or 25% is admirable, but not when it was only $68 million last year, right? And not when you're there. Like, you are one of a handful of teams in the American League that could come out of the American League. this is all we can yell about this any day we want, but point is, you're right. Like, that should not inhibit you from doing anything. And so, like, the other thing, like, you could very well have Josh Bell's $16.5 million come off the books. You're probably going to have Zunino's $6 million come off the books. So there's money to play around with. There should be money to play around with anyway. But giving Amed Rosario a $12 million increase, if that came to it, and we are talking hypotheticals of hypotheticals here, that shouldn't matter.
Yeah, and of course, that's somewhat negated by guys getting arbitration raises. Jimenez would get another raise. Bieber would get another raise. But again, whether we're $10 million shouldn't be breaking the bank. And I'm thinking $10 million that it might be adding to the payroll if he were to accept the qualifying offer. And I wouldn't even put a good percentage chance on that happening. But when you offer the qualifying offer, I think you at least have to ask the question, what if this guy takes it? What does that do for where we're at as a franchise? I think it's that is a risk worth taking. But this is something we can revisit throughout the year because we're lacking a huge piece of this puzzle, which is, how does Rosario play in 2023? That's going to answer a lot of these questions. What if he's fantastic? What if he plays like he finally realizes the potential of being one of the top prospects in baseball and just puts it all together, smacks 17 home runs, steals 25 bases, still continues to hit 298 or whatever the consistency number is, puts up a 4.5 win season? Then we're probably not going to have this conversation about would they or should they not. It's going to be easy to answer that at that point.
Remember when they declined to offer Michael Brantley a qualifying offer? And that was because they were given payroll limitations and they were afraid he might accept it because he had the injuries the previous couple years. So he walks, he goes to the Astros. They get nothing in return for that. And I think the qualifying offer was kind of similar to the annual average value of the deal he got with Houston, which was, I think, a 2-year deal. So like maybe he would have accepted it. I don't know. But like, that was not a good look. And again, that was also, you're in the middle of contending. Was that after 2017, 2018? I think after the 2018 season. So just not what you want to see there. But not saying that that's comparable to this, but it's weird. Part of the calculus has to be guessing what the player's thought process is. And everybody has different preferences. I mean, I think there were a couple people who accepted. I feel like there weren't very many players who accepted the qualifying offer the first handful of years it was a rule. I feel like we've seen more and more as the years have gone on. There were a few this year.
What's some of the adjustments they've made to how it impacts the free agents that were offered a qualifying offer? At one point, it made it so no one wanted to touch those players. I'm not going to give up what it takes to get those guys. But they've made some adjustments, and it's weighted across the board where teams that have lower payrolls would be maybe better protected and maybe more enticing to them to sign one of those free agents as it was previously. And that has greatly impacted the market. I want to keep having conversations about where their payroll is now and a couple other topics that have been kicked around in the Discord. We're going to save that for later this week at the Patreon. Let's wrap up with a couple of things. One, a quick one. Wouldn't you know it, I mentioned on our Patreon show the little contract clause stipulation in Miguel Cabrera's contract that states that if he finishes in top 10 in MVP, that $30 million option kicks in for the next year, and then there's another one if he finishes in top 10 MVP, another $30 million option. We laughed it off. Haha, no way that happens. And then what did Comerica Park announce? Changes to the ballpark. And who tweeted that it was done a little bit too late? Miguel Cabrera. This dude. Calling it now. Calling the shot. He's on his way to that top 10 MVP finish with the fences further in at Comerica Park. This dude's going to revitalize his career just like Pujols did and he is going to realize that $30 million option.
This is putting you on the spot, but can you think of what other players come to mind? Like, the Guardians are protecting a 1-run lead late in the game, and there are base runners aboard, and Miguel Cabrera comes. It felt like he was always at the plate facing Brian Shaw in a 3-2 game in the 8th inning with 2 runners on and 1 out. And you just always assumed he was going to do something, right? Like, it felt like for years he just always ended up being at the plate in those situations and delivering. Anybody else come to mind like that? Like maybe like Paul Konerko back in the day, or Mike Sweeney?
Yeah, that's a good one. Mike Sweeney, yeah. There were a lot of players that felt like that, but when I checked the numbers, they didn't own Cleveland, but it just, maybe the situations that did come through were huge, like Joe Randa. I don't remember why, but it feels like Joe Randa would own Cleveland, but I don't think his numbers suggested that he actually did. Oh, I'm sure there's a bunch. That's too much on the spot. I'd have to think about that and come back later this week. Still got some offseason left to chew on that and kick it around.
Yeah, if he only faced Cleveland pitching, I think he might finish top 10 MVP.
Yeah. And only Brian Shaw is allowed to face him. It seemed to me it was always Salazar had struck him out 3 times in a row. Here comes the 4th time. Whoops, 3-run homer. That was always the way that it seemed to go. Well, he's had success in the previous 3 plate appearances. That means it's going to translate to the 4th one. Miguel Cabrera, I would not put it past him to sacrifice certain at-bats early in a game so that he could set you up to completely body slam you in that 4th one.
Manny Ramirez
would
did
not
that.
Put it past him in his career. Such an amazing right-handed hitter. Manny was too. Don't you even see that within an at-bat? Previously in Cabrera's career, he would almost look late on a fastball just to make you feel like you could get it by him, and then deposit it into the seats.
I did that in like the neighborhood. There was my one buddy would always be pitching against me, and he threw this awful off-speed pitch that he called it the winger dinger, and it would like move a little bit, and it was a terrible pitch. And so
Wait, give me that name again.
The winger dinger.
The winger dinger.
I would like if I missed it just because my timing was off or whatever, and I'd foul it off. I'd be like, man, that pitch is, I would say out loud, like, God, you always get me with that. That pitch is so tough. Just trying to convince him to throw it again. And then I would launch it over a neighbor's house, over their roof. Like, it was, the whole goal of an at-bat was to get one of those and, like, just miss it and then talk it up like it was the greatest pitch ever invented. The winger dinger.
Oh, my, the winger dinger. I'm definitely going to name this show that. Okay, final thing. This one came from our pal Dan in the Discord weeks ago at this point. But he was looking for spring training recommendations, more so going as a fan and how to enjoy the experience. I've never gone as a fan. Have you ever gone as a fan to any spring training ever?
No.
I haven't either, so maybe we would not be the best to answer this question. But I can go based on how I've seen other fans consume spring training and the fans that we have spoken to that have told us what they greatly enjoy about it. For the most part, I would say the games are, not that they aren't enjoyable, but it's the least enjoyable part for everybody. It's being, obviously, outside of Cleveland. It's the perfect time when you escape the weather, and it doesn't matter if it's 70 degrees in Arizona and like that. That's it. It's the best 70 degrees you've ever felt. It's amazing because you're escaping the Cleveland weather and you see the sunshine, blue skies. It's a great time to get to Arizona. To me, it always looked like the most enjoyable part, and if I was a fan, what I would be doing is trying to get there early for those batting practice when the fans are waiting to see guys on backfields or like the 10 o'clock sessions in the morning. That's when you want to be there. That's what you don't get to see any of when the actual season begins. And players are so laid back. They're not worried about what they're going to do that night against a certain pitcher. And so if you happen to see them, they would be very dismissive. They're willing to engage. They want to talk. I mean, they like that part of the season too, because there's no pressure on anybody. That's part of the fun of getting out there. I would just say try to see as much as you can outside of just the game atmosphere. And the games can be fun, and it's relaxing. But getting there for those early sessions, the batting practices, seeing what the team makes available to fans early in the day, that's when you want to be. That is the key to getting out to spring training.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the number one perk, if you are a fan, is what you just said. It's you can park outside of the team's complex, and you can walk down a sidewalk up to a chain link fence, and right on the other side of that fence is Jose Ramirez and Amed Rosario taking batting practice 20 feet in front of you. I mean, it's as close and as intimate a setting as you can get. It's like one step above being front row at Progressive Field for batting practice, because there's also not, there are places where you can go right up to them and get autographs or take pictures with them, and they all stop. So I think that's the cool part. It's such a relaxed atmosphere. I mean, it's the same for us going and covering it. I mean, everybody is just chill. Everybody is optimistic and excited about the season and just relaxed. There's not the pressure of 162 games yet. So I think you can sort of see people's personalities more. You just have access to them that you don't have during the season, whether you're a fan, you're a reporter, whatever. The thing that's great about Arizona that stinks about Florida is everything's close. The longest trip you'll have to any ballpark is probably 40 minutes, 45 minutes. So you can go to Scottsdale one day to see a game. You can go to Peoria one day to see a game. You can see a game in Goodyear. You can see a game in Mesa. You can see a game in Tempe, and it's not going to just destroy your day. Whereas in Florida, I still have nightmares about driving home from a Yankee spring training game in Tampa back to where I was staying in Orlando and getting stuck in traffic and having a 3-hour drive home at midnight. So everything is close in Arizona. I think that's great. Also makes it so that you have to take I-10 a lot of times, and there's never not been traffic backed up on I-10. There's stuff to do.
You just drive in a giant circle. That's your whole trip. Driving in a giant circle.
If you like to be active, there are so many places to hike, and it is the perfect weather for it, and you get some amazing views of the city. I always like to go, whether it's Camelback. The last few years, I've gone down to the White Tank Mountains and disappeared for hours at a time. And there's Piestewa Peak is a challenge, but is fun. And when you get to the top, it's hard to beat that view. So great places to be active. Obviously, you can golf. There's a casino now outside of Glendale. There are like entertainment districts popping up all over the place, whether it's Glendale, Scottsdale, Gilbert, Mesa. So there's a decent amount to do. There's not as much to do in Goodyear, unless you're a big fan of like just every chain restaurant in America. But it's
not bad. That location's not bad because you can get away from some of the craziness.
Yes.
But you are so close to being able to drive to, if you want that, you can go get that on any given night. That's what I like there, is that you can find places that are not as heavily congested, but within 15 minutes I can be there where I want to be. That's what's fun. And maybe you think, I need to stay right where the action is. I don't know that I would suggest that. I would all the time stay in Peoria and drive over to Goodyear because I liked it being more of a centrally located area where it only took me 20 minutes to get to Goodyear, but then I'm 20 minutes from everything else that I want to get to as well.
Yeah, so I solicited some help from our buddy Jordan Bastian because he has been everywhere in Arizona. He's been on both sides. He was in Goodyear, every year for a decade, and then he's been in Mesa the last handful of years covering the Cubs. So I asked him, I said, what are the best restaurants in Arizona? Because I've had people in our Discord and people just in life asking me for recommendations because they're going out to Arizona for a week this year and they want suggestions. He then solicited other writers who have been all over the place. So we have a heck of a list. Are you ready? And then feel free to add or subtract, given your experiences.
Let's do it.
Blue Adobe, Culinary Dropout, Oregano's, Four Peaks Brewery, Angel's Trumpet, plus the awesome arcade bar across the street, Arizona Wilderness Brewery, Bianco, 12 West Brewery, Spinato's Pizza, Yufa's Thai Kitchen, Little Miss Barbecue, Los Sombreros, Clever Koi, OHSO Brewery, Lolo's Chicken and Waffles, Barrio Cafe, Taco Chelo, Cibo Pizzeria, and The Vig, and Thai Orchid Garden. That's his list. I think I've been to a handful of those.
A few of those. Yeah, a few of those sound familiar. But I can't help but notice you left out one very important delicacy.
Panda Express?
And you should drop that list in the Discord. Panda Express. Where was that? Was it just everybody knows that is the number one destination? With all those great restaurants, 75% of Zack's meals are on that way to that Panda, either to or from the ballpark. Can you confirm?
Yeah, I've in our expense report system, you'll start to type in Panda, and it'll say like it'll say like used in 74 recent expenses. Just the number is astronomical. I'd also like to shout out Wildflower Cafe in Goodyear is a really popular spot. It's kind of like a nicer Panera. I've tried to veer more toward there than Panda in recent years, but you see that Panda logo, it's hard to resist.
I don't know why. I just think that somebody is sitting there okaying every expense. But I'm just imagining, there's no way that he got this for a fourth time in the last 2 days. For Zach, I'm TJ. We're just going to hit all the restaurants. What's up, Winking Lizard? See ya.